will be doing React.
Before we move on, please install Node.js first. You can go to the Node.js website.org, install the latest support, long-term support version, so LTS. Node.js is the JavaScript that runs on your PC, so not directly in the browser, but on your PC or a MacBook or wherever. The difference is the JavaScript in the browser has influence, and you can manipulate DOM, so HTML, CSS, you can do a bunch of stuff in JavaScript inside your browser, but the JavaScript in your browser doesn't have any influence on your local PC environment. It cannot turn off your PC, it cannot, write into your files on your locally, it cannot do any of that stuff. But because of that, there's also a version of JavaScript that can do that stuff. It's called Node.js. It doesn't run in your browser, it runs locally in your PC. It can manipulate your files locally, write to them, delete them, do any sort of stuff. So it's basically JavaScript for the server. Your PC is basically a version of a server. The server name, that's just what it is. So install it, we'll need it to run our React locally for development. You can install that for your Windows. I assume most of you are on Windows and on macOS as well. So install it here first. And that's part of our environment setup. You can even go here if you need some more help, LessonMD. So we already installed VS Code previously, but Node.js. Here next explanation about installing it. And in your VS Code console, if your console is not open, or terminal or console, whatever. So remember, we have a console in the browser. It's just a window where you can type some stuff and execute some code for the browser. But here locally, for the local development, the terminal or the console you are using here, you type some stuff and it also executes something, but not in the browser, but locally on your PC. So this console, so in Windows, you should use PowerShell. So it's called Power. Most of newer Windows should have it, PowerShell. It has much better syntax than command prompt that Windows by default has. In macOS, that's a bit different. It's much easier syntax to type in this console, move between folders. So here in the console, it tells me which folder I'm currently in. And I can type ls to see all the children of my folder, so all the folders within my folder I'm currently in. And I can use the keyword cd to enter some of these folders. cd intro, so I'm now inside the intro folder. I can type this syntax to go back to my lesson folder, or I can type multiple of these to go back and again back. And now I'm like in my, what is this? Like I see documents, downloads, pictures, music. So I can now go back into my folder, now go into the learning folder. So this is how I can move between folders and see where I'm currently at. You can also type usually this. I don't know if PowerShell also has this exact command for viewing the current path you are in. But anyways, so this is just a console and how you move in and out of your folders, which is relatively important. So React is a JavaScript framework for building front-end apps. It's built by Facebook and it's used by Facebook in production, which is very important. React just helps us. You don't need to know. So this is a very hugely important thing. You don't need to know exactly how the tool is made, what happens in the background, and so on. You just need to know that React is the tool that you can use to very productively make front-end apps, to build a very complex code base very easily. And that's pretty much it. You need to just know relatively how to use it, or Google how to use certain things in React, and that's it. You just run one command to start the app and you can see it in the browser. That's pretty much it. You don't need to know in-betweens or ins and outs of how the tool works, how the engine is made. You just need to know how to run the car, right? How to use the car. Same thing here. You don't necessarily need to imagine yourself being like an actual developer if you don't know how React does some stuff in the background for you. Like, just, you don't need to worry about it right now or probably ever. So to use React, there's a Create React App library. So JavaScript libraries are just some, like, it's same, but in a way, if I wrote like main.js file and there's a bunch of JavaScript code inside that does certain thing, I'm not gonna repeat that same file and code in like 10 different projects, even like though I need the exact same file in 10 different projects. People created libraries, which is like that exact file just uploaded online that you can download and install, technically install by downloading it for your local project, and then you can just import and use it. You don't need to, that's what's called a JavaScript library. Now, when you install Node.js, if you type node version, if version pops up, that means that you install the Node.js locally. And with the Node.js, you install the npm. npm is basically a registry where all those JavaScript libraries are. So basically, if you install something, you would install it from npm locally for your project and use it from, basically download it from npm and then use it. One of those libraries to generate like an initial code base for a React app is called a Create React App. So basically, you can npm run this command. You can just follow this link, github/facebook/create react app, and then they give you some overview how you can generate your own app, like just a boilerplate to start using React. So either you type this command, which is npx create react app, or there's a bunch of different versions how you can do it. So let me, where am I? So enter React project. Okay, so I'm in React project. So here, for example, I can say npm create React app, and the folder will be named my app, for example. So now that script, Node.js script, is that I just ran this command. It runs a script in the background. The script is basically some JavaScript code, and the JavaScript code now is downloading all the dependencies for the project from npm registry, downloading all the libraries that React needs to work and be running normally as it should. So basically, don't worry about any of this stuff. Just this is generating our initial boilerplate code base for React, and we'll wait for a few moments for it to do that. And so basically it will create a new folder, my app, and inside it will put all the files for our React project, essentially. Okay, it's still running, it's doing its job. Okay, it's done. Basically, it's done. Now, here in the folders, we see my app. That's our new folder. And you see a couple of folders, public, source, blah, 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 package.json. So package.json is a main file where we can see all our dependencies. Basically, dependencies just a bunch of libraries required for our project to work. So anytime we want to run our project, we want to install, just run npm. So we want to enter my app, and we want to run npm install if it's a new project to install all the dependencies noted inside of package.json, and then we can officially run our project. Scripts is just a bunch of commands, start, build, test, eject, blah, 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 that can help us start our project, to see it in the browser, to start working on it, build the project if you finished with the project. So we want to build it and deploy it somewhere, so don't worry about any of these things for now. So just type npm start, which is going to execute this script start command, which is going to run our JavaScript app. And it's going to open it here. So localhost, and this is our port 3000. So basically this is our React app, as you can see here. It's our React app running locally and anytime. So all our React code is inside this folder. Don't get confused with many of these things, this bunch of templating stuff. I'm gonna show you the example how I actually do it myself in a lot cleaner way. So just quickly, we are gonna go through. See here it says Learn React. If I just edit this, update it, and then I click Control S or save, now it says Learn React Updated. This is our app. Basically has something going on here. You can click this, it sends you to the React website and so on. So this is how we install it locally, install our app, and now we can start editing these files and actually build our React app. And very quickly, the way how React works, it's basically we write some React components, which is defined as a function and give you a function name. And every component is usually in its own file, named app.js or whatever. We define a function, which is that function returns some HTML or JSX, which I'm going to explain what it is and difference between this and HTML. It basically looks like normal HTML. And we can export this as a default export for this folder, which means that in index.js, and this is the main file, in this source index.js, there are two libraries, React and React DOM. React DOM attaches our app that we just imported from app folder. So if you import it like this, it imports that default export. So basically, anytime we do something, we need to export it so it can be imported in another file and used in that file. So we export default this app function, so we can then import it in the index.js. So here we imported this React component, and we do this like in HTML in a similar way. This is our custom React component, and we want to attach it to the DOM. We want to attach it to our HTML page. So by calling it React DOM.render, and this is our root. This is our main entrance, like our global parent of our React app. This is where our React app lives. And basically it's attached to document get element by ID. So the second argument to this method is fetch a HTML element and then attach whatever our React app is inside that HTML element. And because in a public we have index.html, so when we generate this project, it gives us like a very simple HTML file. And that HTML file, blah, 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 a bunch of stuff here, who cares? So don't worry about it too much. So the only thing it has inside the body tag is this div with the ID root. So this inside of here is where React is gonna dynamically render our React app. So React code looks like normal JavaScript, and it is normal JavaScript, but here in app.js, in our main component, it looks like a normal, we return some HTML, it looks like a normal HTML. But in the background, Node.js JavaScript language will compile this once the app is built. It will compile this in the background, and this will all be packaged in like a JavaScript files. So this looks like this is a JavaScript, but this looks like HTML, but it's not. This is just visually for us to see it like HTML, so that's why this is very useful for building front-end apps. But in the background, it will get compiled to JavaScript, and then once our index.html page is opened in the browser, React will render all the JavaScript and will compile it, blah, 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 and will display it as a normal, render it as a normal actual HTML in the page, all through JavaScript in the background. But that process that I just explained, you don't need to understand it, you don't need to know how it works, you just need to know this is what it is, and this is all pre-generated by this, so you don't probably need to ever touch this again in your life. So I'm just explaining so you know what it is. So this is our main entrance to our React app. We export it, we import it in the index.js file, and inside this file, React DOM. So we import this library React DOM, and then we call the method render. First argument is our React app, and second one is in which part in our index.html file do we want to render it in, like in which div we want to put our React app. That's pretty much it. So again, all of these things you're never going to touch. we are gonna mostly work on like actually building our React app right here. So this is our main file where our React app starts. So if I type npm start as I did prior, before you saw the screen like a black one with the logo spinning, blah blah blah, but I removed all of that and I literally just return, hey, I'm a React app. So here, if we inspect this, you can see that we have a body, we have this ID root div, and inside this is our React. This is what happened in the background, and all of this is happening for us magically in a way. So it's all inserted. You don't need to worry about anything. You just need to worry about writing your React, and this all happens for us. And you can see that React dynamically imported some JavaScript inside that handles all this, compiling our code, turning it into regular JavaScript, and then that the JavaScript renders all our React code into actual HTML and attaches it into this div ID root. So this is all happening in these scripts right here. And again, you don't need to worry about it. You're never going to touch any of this stuff. This is just happening for you in the background. So let's do it all in this app.js file, our main entrance to our app. So to make a React component, again, it's a function that does something. So the function, the React, it has to return something. It has to return some JSX, and JSX is basically HTML and React components all in one place. Even the HTML itself, it looks like it's a normal HTML. Again, it looks like it's a div, but in the background, once the React compiles our code, is going to be translated to a JavaScript code that will render this div actually in our HTML. Anyways, so the regular HTML is all lowercase letters, and then the convention is for all React components to be written with a capital letter when you insert it into a JSX into another component. So for example, we have a button here. Note that I didn't put like a button, which I can. Okay, let's do this. Whatever. Let's say that our button component is doing this. Or it says click me, for example. So now I can include it here like this. That's basically this is our custom React component, and we inserted it here like this, or like this, whatever. I usually like to break it in multiple lines so it looks a bit nicer. So if you go to our localhost 3000 port, now you can see it. Here's our button. It looks very generic indeed. Anyways, so that's how you create a very basic React component. Nothing much to it, right? Pretty simple. Anyways, so each button, remember attributes like class and ID and so on, and like a source image attribute like ref for a link or source for an image. So all of these attributes per se on React components are called properties. So every custom React component can have basically all regular HTML attributes as properties and any amount of custom properties. So for example, title, click me, the value, so you write it like this, and the value is basically a string or a number or a function or so on. So if it's you can put, I don't know, this is a number. So if it's anything but a string, you have to use curly brackets and then add it's a number, or you can put a function here and say ASD, for example. And when you do this, all of these title ASD, all of these properties will be passed down to your React component here in props. So this is the argument your custom component gets, and you can console log this. Let's see what we get. Always console log stuff if you're not sure, so we can always see it in practice. So if I open my console, number one, this is exactly what I consoled. So props is an object with a title this, and the ASD is some kind of a function. So what more things you can add? So for example, because the props contains now all of these variables and values that we passed to it here in a different component, to insert the variable inside of JSX, you can use curly brackets to insert any kind of variable, and we're just going to access props title. So our button is going to say click me, or if you say click me, I'm a button. Click me, I'm a button. That's it. Basically, this is your React component. This is how you pass some custom properties to it, and this is how you insert variables inside of JSX of your custom component. And then you can basically use this button any place you want in your app, pass some properties to it, and it will render in the screen like this. And we can inspect it basically what it is. It's a div. So this is a div, our main app. We have some text, and we have our custom React component, how it gets rendered. So it's a div, it's some text, and our button, this is how it gets rendered. We have this, and we have this that we inserted. So it's basically rendered in HTML exactly as it's supposed to. Now, additionally, on top of that, we have we can add to the button, for example, event listeners. So, for example, click. So it's all camel cased. So in HTML it's just lowercase like this, but in React it's on click like this. So the value is a function. It's an event, but you can, if you don't need that argument, we can just console log I just got clicked. So anytime we click this, because we added the on event listener, the click event listener, this it will call this function we just defined. That's it. So if you go to the console, we click the button, I've just got clicked. Anytime we do that, this gets console logged. So we covered, this is how the component is made, this is how you pass props, this is how you insert variables inside your JSX that you return from your custom React component, this is how you add event listeners. What else? And then additionally, as I said, besides your regular custom properties you can pass to your React component, you can also add any kind of regular HTML attribute like class, ID. The only difference is the class, it's called class name in React. It's not called class as it is. That's basically the only difference. And then style, for example, we can add some custom style to the button directly inline, like inline CSS, directly on the element. So you can say background color orange. It's basically the value. So as you can see here, we said anything other than string has to be with added as a value with the curly brackets. Then the value of the style is an object, right? So that's why it's like double curly brackets. So we say background color orange, color white, and basically if we voila, there's color orange and the white text. So basically that's it. We can also add a class name, some class, and then we can add an ID, some ID, whatever. So if we inspect this directly here, yes, it does have a class, and it has an ID, and it has some styles inlined like this. So this is how you do it within React. Yeah, pretty much that's the gist of React component itself. Just with this knowledge, you can build so many different. So basically, in different files, for example, we can create a button component, which I usually recommend in a separate file, and then we would basically say export, or you can just define a function button. Let's just copy it over from our app. So this is our component. This is how we define it in a separate file, and we can say export default button. So like I define a default export for this button file, and to use it in a different file, we just need to import it. So we say import button from, and then where is it? Is it in the same folder? It is, button, like this. So we define the button component in a separate file, and then imported it in the file where we want to use it, and then put it, and then we added it to the JSX of this our main component. And basically we have the same result. So you just create React components in different files, import them where you want to use them. So now we imported the button and used it here, but then again, if you have like 15 different React components where we want to use that button, we can just import it in every component, every file of those components, and just reuse it everywhere we want to. So that's very nice thing about React, because it's a reusability of components. Imagine in playing JavaScript and HTML, you reusing this, writing all of this logic over and over and over again in like 10 different places where you need to use it. Here you just define it in one place, you export it, then you import it wherever you want to, and just add it to your JSX. And then when you run your JavaScript app, React app, it just renders on the screen as it should. Conditionals is like, how do you conditionally insert something into your JSX? How do you conditionally say, if it's this, add this, otherwise add something else, right? So basically you use the curly brackets, and then you can either use this logic to check and either add this. So if this statement is true, this condition is true, then render this, otherwise don't render anything. So in React, just if you decide to render null or undefined, nothing will be rendered. Or the easier way is, if this is true and this is also true, this will be rendered in React. So for example, it doesn't matter, this doesn't make any sense in the example, but just to showcase what it can do. So if we add a prop to the button of where type value is cat, then here we can put some logic and say if props type equals cat, then render inside here cat span up with some value, some text cat, otherwise span with some value dog, for example. It doesn't matter. So see this, it did add so it added the cat here span within the button. That's a conditional. We conditionally rendered something. We checked some props or whatever condition we checked here, and it passed true, so this got rendered, otherwise this would get rendered. If we say anything else, for example dog, and we render this, the dog gets rendered. So the props type isn't equal cat, so this is not gonna get rendered, inserted into our JSX here, but this will. This is the operator for doing this kind of check to render either one thing or another, but we can just say if prop type equal cat and render cat, otherwise render nothing. So for example, because type is a dog, nothing will get rendered here. So if we open, there's nothing, there's no cat word here, but if we add a cat here, the cat will be added. So here you can see it being added, and because this is not it. So see, whenever I change something or something changes, the React re-renders the component and rechecks. So anytime a prop changes here, React will trigger a re-render in this button component, and that re-render will check again all of those things and see whether something needs to get removed or changed or updated in the HTML, basically in this, based on these values here, based on our logic. So this is a crucial point, a very critical, important thing in React to understand that anytime some state changes, some properties on a component or something dynamically in the code or something, React triggers a re-render, so that component rechecks everything that's rendered currently HTML for that component and checks whether it needs to render something else, change it, remove this part because this changed now, and so on. That's one more thing we need is to cover is lists. So if you had a list here, and again, this is a basic JavaScript function. So if you have a list 1 to 3, right? This is an array. The way we would render it in JSX is basically, again, curly brackets. We would say list.map. So map and then return every component. So basically we have a number here and we would return. So let's say we return, let's say we do this. So we put div here instead of a normal button. This makes no sense that this is a button, this is a div. This is just for us very quickly explaining how some things work. So let's say we have a list, and inside we would then say list map. So map array function, and then we have each number, and then we return components, and then inside of them we'll say a number. And one key thing is whenever you are rendering a list, they require you to add like a unique key to every list item. So this map function also gives a second argument, index. So index 0, 1, 2, and so on. So here each item should have a unique key. So in the background, the React knows doesn't have any bugs while rendering these items. Doesn't matter, just remember this as is. So now what this will do is we'll loop through our list, and for each item here in the list, in this UL element, it will render us not the span element, a li, because the list has to have a direct li child. This is a list item. So inside we'll render a number. So if you go do this, because it's a div, remember it takes a full bit now. So we have some text. We have this div instead of we call it a button component. But anyways, so you see we have UL, and then our li. We have 3 li elements, and each of them having a value 1, 2, and 3. So basically, it's how you render any list inside of JSX. You use .map on an array and return some component for each element inside of your JSX. So now let's do a very quick example. We need to update this, and here we need to update it also like this. And the name of the file, main animal. Okay, now this makes sense. Anyways, so animal will say the type of animal. The type, it's a cat. The name of the cat, Sebastian or something, I don't know. The age, let's say it's 2 years old. 4 years old. And then in the here, we can say that sure, background color, whatever. So we will render here the name. Let's see what happened. So it's a Sebastian, it's like this. So what we additionally, maybe let's do something maybe a bit nicer. So we'll put the name inside the heading 1 element, and here we can add some styles. Then we can say the text align center, and then we can add some padding. Or we can add some padding to the element above. Okay, let's leave the color. We can add some padding here, I don't know. Okay, so this is our animal, it's a cat, it's a Sebastian, and then we can say the prop type, for example, it's a paragraph, it's also text align, and it's the props type. It's a cat, it's a Sebastian, it's type of animal. We can say like this, type, animal type, colon, and then whatever the type is, the props type. So animal type, cat. Okay, so now, to use state in a React component, what is state? So state is some internal value that that component has stored, and then that component can change the value of that state that it's stored, and whenever the value changes in that state, it will trigger the re-render of that component, and you can see the changes in that value that was rendered in your JSX. Again, this sounds way more complicated than it is. Let's say the I don't know, nickname. So this is how you define a state in your component. You say use state. This is a custom React hook. So basically, this angle bracket is how you destructure something. This is called destructuring in JavaScript. I can very quickly show you this. So if I say const a and b equals array 1 and 2, so it will destructure this array on the right side, and it will each value, so value 1 will be assigned to a, and value b will be assigned to b. Value 2 will be assigned to b. So if we say a variable and b variable holds 2. So basically, this useState function returns two things. This is our variable, and this is our function to change our variable nickname. So for example, anytime you click on this div, we'll change the nickname to something else. So we'll say set nickname, or let's say has nickname, set has nickname. So basically, we'll say that the animal doesn't have any nicknames. So if I say set nickname to whatever opposite that has nickname currently is, this is just changes. If the nickname is true, this changes to false. If it's false, it changes to true. Basically, this is, we already ran through this, so this is opposite, right? So when we do this, let's see, console log 123 has nickname. So whenever we click on this, it's true, now it's false, now it's true, now it's false. Basically, we are altering the internal state of this component. And we can show it here below as well. So we can say another paragraph or whatever, and we can say has nickname, and then whatever our variable is. So basically, see, as we change, it re-renders the component and applies the new change in the HTML. So if we go here, so see that it doesn't re-render and doesn't reattach all the other HTML elements to that it currently rendered for this component in HTML. It only changes this single value that changed within HTML. So React is very efficient in that way. It only re-renders the thing in HTML that actually has changed. Another thing very useful for this is use effect, and you'll see this in actual examples down the road. Once we build once we have the task or actual project. So this is the syntax. So this useEffects function has two arguments. One is a function, and the second one is array of arguments. So nickname has changed. Has nickname has changed. So anytime the value in this array changes from the previous re-render, this function will get called. So basically, this useEffect, anytime some state changes, if you want to do something, anytime the nickname has changed, we want to do some code, we can easily put it here. We don't need to put additional logic to do this and that. Just anytime this specific variable has changed in our state we defined, then this function will get called, and we can put any code inside we want to do something with it. So if we click this, see the function gets called. It says has nickname has changed, true and false. This is its current state, and we get re-rendered here and so on. So basically, yes, this is new to you. I'm sure that this sounds confusing right now, but This is just how you control the state, and this just function is whenever something changes that you noted here in the array of arguments, you call this method, and that's it. And this is how you insert variables. This, I already showed you all of these things, properties, how you attach event listeners. So all of these things so far, just with that, you can make so many different things. Like, this is pretty much the most important parts of React. You don't need to know too much. Even without this, you can still do a lot of stuff. One last thing I want to cover for React is routing. You know, if you have like a home page and then somebody clicks on about page and a contact page, and how do you switch between the pages in React? It's very simple. It's exactly this. We're going to just very quickly do it. So first, in our package.json, we have React and React DOM, like in React scripts. These are like three main things for a React app, three main dependencies, three main libraries. One more we are going to add is React router DOM. No, sorry, npm install React router DOM. So this will add the React router DOM library that will help us switch between pages per se or per components based on the URL in the tab browser, something, whatever. So I created two more components. One is about.js. It's a React component representing our about page, and then I created a home.js, which is a React component representing our home page. And then we have app.js, like just our main entrance to our app. So here we added header, main, and footer. So basically like a regular index.html page that has a header, some content inside, and a footer, right? So if you want to render home page here and about page, how do you conditionally render it, right? If it's just a root path, you want to render just the home component, and if it's a /about, you want to render only about component, but not the home one, right? So you want to, depending on the URL in the browser, render a specific component. So to do this, in index.html, so what they require you is to wrap, so browser router. So from React router DOM, a library that if you don't have installed, install it with npm install React router DOM. So with this, in order to use this routing, we need to wrap our entire app component with this. So router and then app. So now that we've done this in index.js file, like this root one, now in app.js we can use next syntax. So we can say import switch and route components from React router DOM. So what this will do is inside main, we can add this switch component. We can say switch, and inside here, we can define our routing, basically route. So we'll say if the path is this, then the component that you need to render in the HTML, in the main HTML element is home component. And then if the path is /about, then please render about component. But mind you, this route checks because this says this will render the route if the path contains this, and because if we are here, it contains this, but if we go about, this route also contains this. So we need to add a property called exact. So if it's only exact github.com, for example, nothing else on the right side, it will render this component, otherwise it will not. So basically when we do this inside of this, so switch component basically makes sure that only one at a time, one of these children at a time will get rendered. Not all of them or some of them, just one of them at a time. One that matches the route will get rendered. First one that matches this path, that component will get rendered. So if you go here and we go to the about page, we see only about rendered, right? If you go to the root page, only home gets rendered, right? One of the accompanying components React router DOM gives us is a link component. So for example, we can have multiple links. So we can say the link is homepage and it links to this, right? So we can have multiple links, home and about. for example. So if you click, so here in the header, if you click home, you are home. If you click about, it changes the URL, and it also, by that logic in the switch, because the URL changed, and now it matches the about component for the path, it will render the about one. So basically, this is how you create like an app. Like you can jump between routes, you can conditionally load certain route, certain React component based on the URL, and so on. If we did it outside switch, for example, like this, both will get rendered. The one that matches will get. So in this case, because I removed exact from here, this one matches and this one matches. So both will get rendered here, home and about. If I just go here, only home will get rendered. But when we go back to switch, only one, that first one that matches will get rendered at the time. So this is the difference with the switch component, essentially. So basically here, there you go. We have switch, so you can this way. This is the way. And again, inside the main component, so we have this main. So inside here, look at how it gets. So only main HTML element gets updated and then content inside. So we switch from a home React component to about React component depending on the routing we are in. And imagine just with this simple concept how many cool things you can do. You can put in headers a bunch of links to your pages, and inside the main, depending on the path, you can switch between different components and then just create a whole homepage here and then create a whole about page here inside of this, and basically you can have a whole website with a bunch of different pages just with this small concept in mind. And the links to switch between the pages in this way. That's pretty much it for our React simple beginner tutorial. Just with these things and the previous things we went through, you can build like full-fledged browser apps, very complicated browser apps. Now it just depends how you create it. Let's go to the task. So if you go to the task folder in React tutorial folder, so what is the task? So a few pre-task notes. So in order for the browser to communicate with the server, and imagine, we'll discuss this in the next tutorial, in the tutorial after the next one, regarding the server we can build. So the server, imagine it being a software, just a program running on a PC in somebody else's house, right? In somebody else's home. And that server talks to the database. And database is also like a software running on somebody's PC. So the database is basically like managing folders and files locally and so on. Every time we insert something into the database, it creates a file with some data in a folder on that local PC, right? So now the only thing server has to do, that program that runs locally on somebody's PC, it basically asks database, hey, can you give me some data in those files? And it returns it. And then the server returns that data to our browser app here. So in order for our browser app to talk to that software, that server software that talks to the database, returns some data to us and so on, we have to make HTTP requests. HTTP requests are basically is browser standard, the way the browser apps, for example, are communicating with external softwares and apps that's running on another PC somewhere externally and so on. Basically, you send, anytime you enter this website, it sends an HTTP request of type of method get. So there's like multiple methods, get, post, put, delete. And it basically sends a request to github.com, basically to that URL. And then the github.com server knows you, or for example, this entire URL, the github.com receives the request for this entire URL from my browser right here, and it knows that I'm in my learning repository, I'm in this folder, and then it returns me this entire page right here. So to make an HTTP, we'll go through HTTP requests once we get to building a server. It's not that hard, just very confusing probably now that you hear it for the first time. But in order to make HTTP requests, I would suggest installing an Axios library, so npm install Axios. So you can literally just say import Axios from Axios and then axios.get and then add a URL to get some data from whatever that URL and so on. Anyways, to make So another thing which is very important is async await syntax in JavaScript. JavaScript, so how JavaScript works. If you have a function and there's a bunch of lines of code, the JavaScript very quickly executes each line of code one by one. That's called synchronous execution. So it's not waiting for anything, it just goes, executes very quickly line by line. Now, usually in our JavaScript, we have some lines of code that have to wait for a certain amount of milliseconds or seconds for some request to resolve, for us to get some data, and then we want to continue with our JavaScript lines of code. In order to do this, we use async await. So basically, as you see here, get post function, anytime you want to use await in the code, that function has to have a sync prefix to it. So basically what happens here is, if we didn't put await here and here, JavaScript would just run through this, it wouldn't wait for a response for us to get a response for this HTTP request, it would immediately go through these lines of code and it would finish. But we don't want that to happen. What we want to happen is we define a variable and inside we will store the value that we fetch. So basically this URL returns from a server, for example, array of 3 blog posts. And in order for server to respond, it takes him like 500 milliseconds, right? So what we want to do is we want to await until we get the response. So basically this pauses the JavaScript execution on this line until we get the response. Once we get the response, JavaScript continues executing our code in this function. So basically it will then do this, and then it will, then finally we will get a response from our server getting those array of blog posts, and then we can console log to see that we got them. We can update the state in React saying, hey, these are the blog posts we just got, and then we can render those blog posts inside of our app. Basically, that's it. So we'll see this in action. This again sounds probably confusing explaining it like here in text, but you will see it in action. Now, the task you have is create a home React component. In the home component, create a state called posts, create a method like above, where you fetch blog posts from this exact URL. So this is like a dummy server, that returns some stuff. So you can hit this, you will get all of these data. You'll get array of objects, and each object has some properties, title, body. So these are represents like individual blog posts. You'll get a list of blog posts as a response from this server once you send a get HTTP request to this URL, right? Then call this method above in useEffects lifecycle method, where the second argument of useEffects is an empty array. Remember when I said the useEffects lifecycle method, in the second argument, array of arguments, it's gonna call that the first argument, the function of useEffects, anytime some variable in the second argument, the array of arguments changes. So if it's an empty array, the second argument, it's gonna call this useEffects method only once the React component initially renders. It's never gonna call it ever during the life cycle of during the life of that React component. It's only gonna call it once the component initially attaches to the DOM or basically HTML. So we only want to call this getPost method once there to get post as soon as the component is loaded initially, get the posts, and then display them in the component. That's pretty much it. And then once you fetch the post, save the response in posts state. So basically posts and set posts like I've done here. So you call set posts on a response to save it in the internal React component state. And then in the home JSX, so what you return in your home component, loop through those posts from the state basically value and render each post with any HTML element you want. Basically, you can add a post title, post body inside some HTML element just to render all the posts. And then you can additionally create a CSS file and import it and add some classes to it, or maybe add some inline CSS to those components, whatever you want to. And then basically import that home component into your app.js and add it to your app.js component, and that's pretty much it. And let's see how you've done it.
2,000 years later.
I'm gonna very quickly show you my solution that you also have in a task folder. So my home.js component, basically I have a get posts function. It's an async function. And with Axios, it's very simple. You just need to await. So await Axios get and pass the URL, and the response will get array of those blog posts stored in a response variable. We can console log to see what we got. We use set posts, so this use state, but set post, we save it there. Now and then we call that function here in use effective identity array with the second argument, meaning this use effect will only be called once this component initially renders. That's important. So we just initially once get these posts, not every time or every few seconds, just one time to get these posts. And with all of this, the posts will now have the post inside array of posts. As soon as that happens, inside the div, we'll say if the posts exist or we got them, then we can look through posts.data because this is how they are. We get them back. Posts is basically an object with data inside, and data property then has all the blog posts. That's why we have to. But we will see it once we log it. You will see what you get as a response. So post.data is array. This value of this actually is array of blog posts. So we map it. Call a map. We take each post, and for each post we render a div inside and a heading and a paragraph. Heading will have post.title and paragraph has post.body variable inside. So this will render array of posts into our home page. And then basically we just insert it in app.js, import the home component, add it here, and then let's see what happened. So where am I? So if I go to task and then solution, and then I can just start my React app and let's see what happened. Okay, so it's loaded. So look at this. It took few milliseconds for our home component to get the blog posts, and this is the response we logged. So it's an object, the response is an object, it has a bunch of these things inside, and then inside of data, we have all of these blog posts. It's basically an array, essentially a list with a bunch of objects, and each object having a body and the title of a blog post, and an ID of a blog post, whatever. So basically that's what we look through and basically add it to our home JSX. Each post in a div, and each div has a heading and a paragraph. Heading has a variable of post title, and the paragraph has a variable of post.body. And basically it inserts itself here, and here you go. Here is our simple app. Fetches some blog posts from a URL and inserts them all in one page. There you go. That's how you make HTTP requests. And then we save it in a state. We call this function here initially, so we actually triggered this method to get the posts. If you forgot to do this, we would just have this defined, but we never call it to fetch the blog post. So this is why we need to call it somewhere. Call it in use effects method. We only call it once because second argument is empty. And then basically render it here in the home component. We add a home component again to app.js, our main entrance to our React app, and that's pretty much it.